Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event. Let's get ready to rumble!
Hello everybody and welcome to our feature match today. It is Naya Bonzu versus Death Shadow. Now that title on your left might seem weird because honestly I don't know what this guy calls his deck. It's kind of Bonnie but it's kind of zooey. And the real reason I'm confused is because the deck does have Court Apes. And I would say Court Ape is more of a zoo build, but there's no Bushwhack or Tree Emissary, so who knows. So here's that aforementioned Court Ape. Just really good. It's already a 2-3, which is good because it's going to be able to attack through this Swift Spear. Now, that's not an ideal one drop. A Goblin Guide on turn 1 probably would have been good because there would have been 2 more points of damage. But as it stands right now, with again the Swift Spear not being able to block, it's still pretty good. Ideally, it would probably be a turn 1 Nakata for turn 1 on the Born player side. So this Shadow player has a lot of ways to do damage to himself. As you notice, there's the multicolored pain lands and the Street Wave, paying 2 life, being able to cycle it, draw a card, is one of the many ways that the Death Shadow's deck is able to do damage to itself. And here's a trifecta of Swift Spears on the Death Shadow side. So as it stands right now, the Court Ape can still attack profitably through these Swift Spears, but the Born player is probably thinking it's better to keep it on defense, as with 3 Swift Spears and untapped mana and a pretty good grip in hand, 1 pump spell can cause a lot of damage with the power struggles. So here's a block, and Tainted Strike is gonna pump up the Swift Spears and it's gonna kill that Goblin Guide. So of the 2, you really want the Goblin Guard to die because it gives your opponent pseudo advantage by adding lands to their hand, and the Court Ape is a 2-3, which in the given board state is really valuable right now. So here's the Eidolon. Now, Eidolons are in Born decks because it doesn't matter the 2 damage that you're taking from your own Eidolon. It's that for every 2 damage you're taking, you're giving your opponent a potential 3 and up damage, and they still have to cast those spells. And in Modern, mostly everything is converted mana cost 3 or less. So they end up dealing damage to themselves while you're still dealing them damage before you end up dying to your own Eidolon. So here's the card of the deck, the namesake card, Death Shadow. Now, that's a pretty big threat. As it stands right now, it could be a huge problem for the Born player. Main deck, there's probably nothing they have to deal with something this big. But the Born player is still going to play out his creatures regardless of the 2 damage that doesn't deal himself. And the Death Shadow player is just going to attack him with his big Death Shadow, which is going to demand a block every single turn. So I guess the Death Shadow player is content with just whittling down defenders until he can Alpha Strike in. So again, the 2 life loss for summoning the Court Ape is nothing compared to the massive hit he would take if he just let this Death Shadow go through. So here's a double block, potentially insulating himself from a pump spell that gives trample. So He doesn't have one though, but he does lose the two creatures in the exchange. So the board state's getting pretty dwindled down on the Bond player side, and just two more turns if the board state stays as is. This giant Death Shadow with all his Swift Spears are going to be able to come in through for a lot of damage. So it's just a pass of the turn and a quick attack. It's going to be blocked by a Swift Spear. And again, no pump spells, no protection spells. So here's a Lightning Helix, which is going to net the Bond player +1 life because the Eidolon will trigger and deal him 2 damage. And 3 damage to the Death Shadow's face. So it's 5 to 8. So this board state is really precarious. The Bond player is going to have to be really careful. So an attacker's command, 2 damage to himself and 3 damage to the Death Shadow player. Now, because there's an Eidolon on board and the opponent is at 2 life, he is in an Eidolon lock, so any spell he casts with converted mana cost 3 or less is going to end up killing him, so he's going to have to deal the final blow with combat damage on the ground, but without having to pump your creatures. It's just 2 damage right here, and the Death Shadow being blocked by the Eidolon. But that bought the Bond player 1 turn, and considering we haven't seen any bolts, Bowish Charms, another attacker's command, a Helix, there's a plethora of ways that the Death Shadow player is probably dead. 2 Goblin Guides would do it also. But let's see what the choice is going to be. So here's the Swift Spear. And that was the Lightning Bolt, which is going to take care of game 1. So game 2, Death Shadow player would mulligan down to 5, I believe. And he's going to think about it. He's going to look at the top of his deck and going to say no. Oh yes. He's considering it. That's a no. So going to go to the bottom of his deck, and then he's going to Psycho Street Wraith. So doing that first than anything, he might not have lands in hand. Although I don't know if you keep without any hands with that deck. But he did have a land either from the Street Wraith or in hand. Again, here's the turn 1 card ape, which I'm liking more and more. Again, a turn 1 Nakado is ideal, but if the Death Shadow player casts a Swift Spear, I'll still be able to attack through it, but he's going to cast a Core Firewalker instead, which is a huge headache for Born. It's pro red, and whenever a player casts a red spell, you gain 1 life. So the Born player is going to need to get rid of this Firewalker as soon as possible, or it's just going to be a huge headache. And so here's a Path to Exile, which I believe is the only way that that deck can take care of a Core Firewalker, since it does have protection from red, and the paths are, I guess, came in from the side, which is, expectable, since Death Shadow is really how the opponent's deck is going to be killing you. So is another card ape. And so here's the Death Shadow and another Death Shadow. Now these are not that big right now, the 2/2s, but with an untapped land, and the Death Shadow player has a nice grip in his hand, these things can be pretty big, so the Born player is going to attack in and test the waters, see if he wants to block with one of them or whatnot. And the Death Shadow player is only going to block the 1. So as it stands right now, they are 2/2, so it's just going to be a chump. But the Born player is going to try to seize the initiative by bolting the other Shadow, so that the Death Shadow player is going to have to choose potentially between saving one or the other. But here's an Apostle's Blessing. giving the shadow that's targeted by bot pro red. And the thing is about Apostle Blessing, he used it casting Phyrexian mana. So 2 life down, and now the Death Shadow that is being blocked by the Court Ape is bigger than it, and it's gonna be able to eat it. And what seemed to be a favorable position for the Bond player is now favorable for the Death Shadow player, all in the matter of 1-2 spell cast. So now these things are really big. They're going to attack in, though, 6 sixes each. So it's going to be attacking in for 12. And here's the Phyrexian Unlife. If you guys are unfamiliar with this card, it is kind of niche. Essentially, for this deck, uh, he sides it in for bone matchups because it essentially gives the Death Shadow player 10 extra life, because you do have to deal with the 6 points of damage and then the 10 points additional for the infect. But the only way the bone player can get past this is burning them down to a 3, and then have a destructive revelry to get rid of the Phyrexian Unlife and deal the final 3 damage. But in the dark, why would you have that game 2? I wouldn't. It's the only thing you could hit off of that. So he knows he's dead and he scoops up, and here we are in game 3. So here's a little bit of shortcutting. The Bone player announced that he has a Nakado turn 1, and the Death Shadow player just plays a tap land. Not willing to spend the 2 life on it yet, because he doesn't have a turn 1 play. So here's a boosted up Nakado. And swinging on in for 3 damage. And there's another Nakado and a Court Ape. Now this is it's going to be pretty hard for the Death Shadow player to deal with. You potentially have to race, and you don't have a Death Shadow out because it'd be dead, but you're going to be taking on a lot of damage in the meantime. So here's a chump block, and now Death Shadow player is at 12. Now this is a really bad position for the Death Shadow player. Like a Phyrexian Unlife would be okay, because your Death Shadow is going to be pretty big and it's going to be able to start eating up attackers. But as it stands, it is getting pretty bad for the Death Shadow player. So here's an attack again to test the autos. The Bomb player is not 100% sure if he should attack with the Court Ape, because as it stands, the Death Shadow is a 3/3, so it's eat the Court Ape and trade with the Nakados. So the Death Shadow player is considering it and decides on nothing. Potentially, an attacker's command is bad regardless. So the play would be to block the Court Ape, because if it's going to end up dying to a pump shot anyway, you don't need to trade with the Nakado. You can just eat the Court Ape. But the Death Shadow player is at 4, and there's a plethora of spells in the Born player's deck that can deal the final points of damage. Not to mention, with the creatures on board, if he doesn't have a sweeper, actually, he's dead. So here's an attack and a deflecting palm. Wow. So what the Death Shadow player could have had with that attack is be able to give his Death Shadow double strike potentially, and then infect, and that would have been an infect win, and then that would have been game. But the deflecting palm just says nope. That card is amazing because it doesn't target. Even if you try to give protection to your Death Shadow, it doesn't matter. So I hope you guys enjoyed the games. I'm really happy with the way these games turned out. If you guys liked the video, go ahead and give it a like. Go ahead and comment, subscribe. I really like talking to anybody about these videos. I enjoy making them, and I want them to be as best as possible. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a good day.